Most boxers become familiar fighting in same stance matchups. Because most boxers are orthodox and they train and fight other orthodox fighters, this becomes the norm. In today's video, we're going to discuss the less common open stance matchup, where a southpaw and an orthodox fighter are fighting, have a lengthened power side and a shortened lead side. Understanding the differences between an open and a closed exchange is going to give you success when you fight. Helping me with today's lesson is going to be our resident southpaw, Dylan. When talking about same stance or opposite stance matchups, the terminology that most coaches and boxers are going to use is a closed exchange or an open exchange. A closed exchange is when two fighters of the same stance, an orthodox fighter and an orthodox fighter, or a southpaw and a southpaw, are fighting each other. It's called the closed stance because they're closed off to each other's power side hand. An open stance is when a southpaw fighter and an orthodox fighter are fighting each other, where they're open to each other's power side hand. When an orthodox fighter and a southpaw fight each other, they can both hit each other with the cross, without much movement, without much setup. This is why a lot of coaches hyper-focus on the cross, both when training and when fighting southpaws. People talk a lot about the Southpaw Advantage. Well, I think the Southpaw Advantage only exists against people who are uneducated about how to fight in open exchanges. And I really believe that if you level experience and knowledge, Southpaws are actually at a disadvantage because their liver side, their right side, is forward in an exchange. I've fought lots of southpaws during my boxing career, and I always had success aggressively pressuring them and attacking that body, attacking that lead side liver. In all other ways, an open exchange is a true mirror match, as most fighters are going to quickly realize when they try to jab and find themselves bumping into their opponent's jab. There are lots of ways that fighters go about solving this problem. Usually, orthodox fighters are going to become very physical. They're going to start fencing and pushing and pulling with that lead hand to try to create a path of attack. Southpaw fighters don't have this luxury because if they're out here fencing with this hand, that lead liver side is left exposed. Frequently, what southpaws will end up doing is they'll end up adopting a half guard. This both protects their liver side and allows them to jab up and under their opponent's jab coming high back at them. I don't like the southpaw half guard because I think it encourages fighters to sit on the back foot and to be too counter-focused. If you look at high-level fighters like Lomachenko, Usyk, or Manny Pacquiao, you can see how having an active lead hand and an active jab allows you to lead and allows you to pressure. We're going to circle back around to this and talk about how to keep your jab functional and busy in an open exchange later. Orthodox fighters frequently adjust their stance in open exchanges as well. To protect themselves from their opponent's cross and power side hand, they'll frequently adopt a thirds guard, where they sit a little back, they hide behind their own right hand. This allows them to lengthen their opponent's attacks and continue fencing and being physical with that lead hand. Let's circle back to jabbing in open exchanges. In a closed exchange, the jab is its own reward. You throw the jab, there's an unobstructed path to hitting your opponent, you'll land a clean shot. In an open exchange, whenever you throw the jab, you're bumping into your opponent's lead hand. So you need to find a way to make that jab functional. If you want to do this, you need to master the quadrant jab. So the quadrant jab is 4 different jabs coming in the quadrants around your opponent's lead arm, designed to spread their defenses thin and allow you to shoot through those gaps. The drop jab attacks low center line. The step jab attacks low elbow side. An arcing jab attacks over the lead shoulder. And the neutral jab squeezes between your opponent's guard. Using these 4 jabs in clever combination is invaluable to your success in open exchanges and is going to clear a path for more potent shots. If you're looking to do some film study, Alexander Usyk is an active and current master of this concept. In addition to a handful of new jabs, the open exchange also creates the opportunity to throw 2 other powerful punches that you don't commonly see in a closed exchange. The first, because of the lengthened rear side, is a long rear hook. Because that lengthened rear side encourages opponents to sit back and to parry, they are right in position as they reach for that parry or as they try to pull out of range to catch a long rear hook. Contrastly, the shortened distance between the lead side encourages fighters to hand play or encourages fighters to adopt a half guard. In either of these situations, their hand isn't back at home protecting them and creates an opportunity for a new punch, the overhand lead. The overhand lead is an overhand 3, and it is an exaggerated hook where you chop down over your opponent's shoulder into their neck, into the back of their jaw, and is my favorite of the specialty punches in an open exchange. On the subject of punch selection, most of the heavy lifting done when damaging your opponents and selecting power punches is done by the 2 and the 3 in open exchanges. These fill the same openings that the 5 and the 4 would fill in a closed exchange, and they pair very, very well together and are very, very high percentage. You should throw 3-2, 2-3, or pair them in longer combinations if you're on the attack. In addition to that, they work both as attacks from the outside and as attacks in the middle distance. Our next technique has to do with attacking the body. So, in an open exchange, you can still use your regular catch and pitch counters when somebody tries to attack your body, the block 5 and the block 6. But if you are the southpaw in an open exchange, you have an additional responsibility because you have an additional vulnerability. Having your liver side forward means that it is not enough to just defend your body. You can defend your body all night long, and if you do not punish and disincentivize that person for trying to attack your body, then they're going to keep going back to that well. And especially with liver punches or punches to your solar plexus, it only takes one to end your night. As I said, it is not enough to defend, you must disincentivize. So, because your liver is already forward, you don't need to worry about accidentally pulling it nearer to your opponent, which frees you up to block with either elbow, with either forearm when somebody goes to attack your body. So you don't have to just catch and pitch off the same arm. You can use that defense to cross block and then fire from the far side, both with the cross block 6 and with the cross block 3 being your most common attacks and counters in this situation. Our next 4 differences have to do with angles and footwork. Our first difference here is about the depth that you take angles. In an open exchange, you don't need to take deep 90-degree angles when you go to your left or you go to your right, all right? If you're going to your closed side, by the time you've reached 45 degrees, you're in a position that you could exit or that you could attack. When you go to your open side, you want to get to that 45-degree position where you can shoot your opponent's center line and quickly go on the attack. Because that open side is such a lengthened distance, every second that you're over there, you're sitting in front of your opponent's power side hand. And because it's such a lengthened distance, it's very difficult and risky to exit to that side. Building off of this idea that there's a shortened distance that you have to travel to gain advantage in an open exchange, we should talk about note number 2. With footwork, you should constantly be trying to outmaneuver your opponent laterally, and you should be using feints regularly. Open exchanges lend themselves to a pendulum step style of footwork because feints and deception are built in. But even acutely, a quick feint to your left before cutting right, or a quick feint to your right before cutting left, is more likely to create an opening that is plenty big enough for you to attack through. And you shouldn't sit there and try to fight on the line when success is frequently only a step or a lane away. Our next note on footwork in an open exchange has to do with matching angles. If you look at somebody like Guillermo Rigondeaux or James Toney, you can see that when you are matching an angle, you only have to take one step to do so. In a closed exchange, both the person leading and matching the angle has to take 2 steps to get back into stance. But in an open exchange, simply pivoting around that lead foot puts you back in a fighting position, which buys you a moment to front load offense and to be able to counter. It's important to remember that if you try to lead simply by pivoting around that lead foot, you're either cutting an angle on yourself or setting yourself up to punch at nothing. Our final footwork note in an open exchange has to do with stepping on or tripping over the lead foot. That lead foot for both the Southpaw and the Orthodox fighter is the nearest point of interaction for both athletes. A lot of bad fighters accidentally step on the foot, accidentally trip over the foot, and lots of good fighters purposefully step on the foot and purposefully trip their opponent with the lead foot. I always like to talk to my athletes about my third MMA fight with a guy out in Iowa who was a Southpaw. He was the first Southpaw I ever fought in an MMA context, and he was so good at interacting with that lead foot. He'd step on it, he'd kick it out, he'd trip me over it. He recognized that that was the nearest point of contact, and he gave me fits dealing with it. I eventually figured it out, buried him on the inside, and I got the job done, but it was a really important lesson for me as an Orthodox fighter at the time to recognize that there's a whole scope of fighting that I hadn't yet exposed myself to or mastered in the open stance. Lots of high-level fighters will intentionally step behind their opponent's lead foot in open exchanges, so as they try to exit, they stumble and are left vulnerable. And the really cruel and crafty fighters in open exchanges will use a slip and slide entry to trip their opponent over their lead hip. This is obviously illegal, but it's something you should be aware of because people will try to use it as a bullying tactic on you. All of this brings us to a special final note on open exchanges where I have a platform to answer a question that I get asked very, very frequently. How do I fight or as a Southpaw when on the inside? Most Southpaws switch to Orthodox on the inside. I believe this is the safest option because it closes as much of that distance between you as you're able, and it gets your liver far away from the action. For my Southpaws who are interested in making this switch on the inside, we've got lots of videos on fighting on the inside and fighting in the clinch in a closed exchange. For my fighters who want to stay Southpaw or maintain that open exchange on the inside, here's how you're going to do it. If you intend to stay Southpaw on the inside, the first thing you need to do is establish control of your opponent's lead arm, of their left arm. This can be with an underhook or with an overhook, and you must do it to stop them from spamming your liver on the lead side. Once you've established control of that arm, you need to step your lead foot inside of their lead foot. I know that it's common knowledge for most coaches to tell their fighters that in an open exchange they need to get their foot outside. This is true if you're out of range or if you're in the middle distance, but by the time you get to the inside, you want to put your opponent in what's called a T position so that you can walk them backwards over their heel. Whoever has this dominant inside foot position in an open exchange on the inside is going to be able to walk their opponent around the ring to bad macro positions. They're also going to have better leverage to throw their rear hand, their power side hand. The final thing you need to do if you want to stay a Southpaw on the inside is get your head in tight onto the front of their opponent's shoulder or into their chest. This is going to lock down that grip you have on their lead arm and give you a leverage point to help you push and shove your opponent off base. From this now very dominant position, you're going to treat this like a rough and tumble push and shove hockey scrap. You're going to catch and pitch with your power side hand while holding your opponent in place. You're going to walk them off balance, pushing and shoving forward and backward, and you're going to make this as ugly as you can. If you're an Orthodox fighter in this position, know that you can play this game with the Southpaw as well. Establish control of their arm. Remember, if they have an underhook, you have an overhook, and vice versa. Get your foot in your head in dominant position and unleash hell. This is certainly not a comprehensive list of how to fight in an open exchange, but it's more extensive than most. As usual, in true coach fashion, this script really got away from me. This was meant to be a small video and it ended up being a big video, but I got a lot of knowledge that I want to share with you guys. A few takeaway notes. You want to remember that whether you are a Southpaw or an Orthodox fighter, unless specifically noted, you have access to all of these techniques as long as your opponent is in the opposite stance. Your awareness and understanding of these differences between a closed and open exchange is going to allow you to pick the tools that are going to work for you in these situations when you fight.